Yeah, I mean, let me first start by saying I'm not trying to make any enemies, but I thought it was an interesting tweet from a South African sort of public intellectual and policy specialist by the name of Gwen Ngwenya. She's the head of policy for South Africa's leading opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. Now, very briefly, the Democratic Alliance styles itself as this classically liberal political party. They support free market economic policy. They're vehemently opposed to any race based redress, despite South Africa's past. They recently officially adopted a policy of non racialism, which is supposed to articulate this. A lot of prominent figures in the Democratic Alliance, like Helen Zille, who was a former leader of the party and is now the party's federal chair, sort of are very active on social media. They like to fight against identity politics. They see it as this scourge on South African society, and they've appointed themselves to oppose it. So basically, this sort of like South African Republican Party, but also quite Tory-like. So that's just, in a nutshell, who they are. And Gwen is their head of policy. And she tweeted about reading Jacobin.
But before you say that, I think she used to work for the South African Institute of Race Relations, which is a sort of like the house, how can I say it? Like, they're like the think tank of the Democratic Alliance. Well, we don't have the time for that now, but of a faction within the Democratic Alliance. Let's just put it like that. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if people want to know more about the Democratic Alliance, they should check out the show we did with Christopher McMichael.
Yes.
On the South African right, and he gives a really good breakdown of all of these ecosystems and relationships. But Gwen tweeted about reading Jacobin, and Jacobin is a partner of ours. They're America's leading socialist publication. So I think a lot of people did a double take when they saw that, and she sort of explained the virtue of reading Jacobin as it's an informative and witty magazine. Later on, she described it as, it's important to read the intelligent left. And I think it's great that she reads Jacobin. I'm quite envious that she gets physical copies of the magazine quite timelessly to her inbox, because when you're in South Africa, it's very difficult to get international publications delivered to you in a timely fashion. So I wonder what her trick is. But
well, she actually said she gets it from the post office, which I thought was another interesting thing.
Another interesting thing. And I guess that's the.
Well, before let's tell people why we think that's interesting. I think their party is always about privatizing everything, or most things, including what you might call public utilities. So I thought it was interesting that Yo was like probably one of their most senior policy officer saying, I get it from a higher power or something. I'm just paraphrasing now. This was in another tweet. And I got it through the post office. I was like, I know how people in South Africa can go on about the post office. So this was I thought that was also good. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all the more interesting precisely because of that. And when you wonder about, okay, well, what does it mean to be part of the intelligent left? How is Jacobin an exemplifier of that? And why are you reading the intelligent left in a foreign publication as opposed to local publications? It's sort of, I guess one thinks, well,
don't be so hard on her. Well, she's discovering something good.
Yeah, and you think, well, are there no intelligent left wingers in South Africa that are worth reading? Not that that's what she's saying exactly, but I guess that's the path one ends up wondering upon. And what I think is especially interesting about the sort of current of public intellectual that I think she represents, which is this liberal that is, again, vehemently critical of identity politics, sees it as South Africans, when they talk about race, when they talk about gender, sexual orientation, they're importing American frameworks. And I think what is interesting about that group is that they have quite a deeply held caricature of the left in South Africa. They think about it in the same way that Americans think about their left, as these cultural Marxists who are only interested in identity politics, or they're these sloganeering Soviet-style Bolsheviks that just want to nationalize everything and send people to labor camps, which I think is how most people think about left-wingers in South Africa's elite public sphere, which of course overlooks that South Africa has a very rich intellectual tradition on the left, and at present does have a lot of people who are seriously thinking about a lot of these issues, including identity politics. There's some people who have thoughtful critiques about some of the biggest hobby horses that liberals have.
IFAS, think of IFAS, for example.
Yeah. I mean, we've published a lot of stuff in Africa as a country too. There are publications like Amandla, which are rooted in working class communities and social movements that have organic intellectuals making these arguments in a very lucid way. New Frame, which does really compelling journalism. I guess the point is that there are a lot of there's an intelligent left in South Africa. Of course, maybe one of the reasons why it's not as visible as it once was has to do with how the left in the last 25 years has weakened. Its constituent organizations like trade unions have weakened also. And so in society, it occupies this marginal position. So its ideas aren't as hegemonic anymore. They aren't as influential anymore. They don't permeate these elite discourse spaces as much as they once did. And that would naturally explain why no one sees the stuff as much as they might have 25 years ago. But I guess it's happening. And
I mean, for me, what I think is probably I'm sitting here next to like a loud police car in New York City. This is very kind of regular New York activity. But I think for me, when you said, like, how did we get to, and again, we don't want to read too much into Gwen and Gwenya's comment about the intelligent left or whether or not she's slighting a South African left. I think maybe that's the lesson we take away from it, that somebody is, and it's great that she's reading Jacobin. But it does, and I want to extend this not just to South Africa, but to other parts of the continent too. I think that it is true that ideas that, and again, we speak mostly about our South African experiences, that were very, the sort of Joe Slovo writing a Has Socialism Failed piece in, I think it was Work in Progress in 91, and everybody's reading it, right? Or the national when people used to debate the national question,
absolutely,
Jordan, etc. The Work in Progress is, and I'm going to say something about this in a minute, is one of those publications I think that kind of messes with the idea that South African left debate is either people screaming at each other or sort of the RET.
Exactly.
Radical economic transformation crowd, which is often just like a Trojan horse for Jacob Zuma's resurrection or whatever. I think people think that that's the left, or then another version of the left, and this is no slight on those people, but the ones that came out of the Center for Civil Society that used to be at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and they had a heyday. They had a website. This was Adam Habib in another life, Patrick Bond, Andile from the Blackland First. Like, so there was a point where they held like the space. They don't hold that space anymore. And I think what I was going to make a pleading for is, I think that you can do that kind of writing that we associate with American style publications like The Nation or The Progressive. Or what you think in Britain of like the New Statesman or something like that. Like, it's a kind of a magazine of ideas. Like, those things don't exist anymore, but it did exist at some point in those places where we are from. And I thought it might be good to just say something about that. I think we forget that, like, in the 1960s, there was a magazine out of Uganda called Transition, which was run by Rajat Nyoji, who was a Ugandan of Indian descent. And that magazine was a bit like how you think of Jacobin now, like, with articles by Soyinka, Achebe, Kwame Nkrumah, Issa Sevji, just anybody that you could think of, Louis Nkosi. And again, this was like a magazine as like a house with many rooms. they would all publish inside this magazine. And for me, I think, as I've said this many times, so if you've heard me on this before in other forums, I always argue when I talk to people, I always say that for me, Africa as a country is trying to do what Transfusion tried to do on a continental basis. But then more than that, because I'm from South Africa and I'm very much a product of sort of growing up in the 1980s, that's kind of when I'm a teenager. For me, that period in South Africa was probably the most fruitful in terms of producing kind of magazines of ideas. And I'll mention a couple of them here. Staff Writer was mostly about kind of literary culture. So many of those debates that you later read about, culture as a weapon, as a weapon of struggle, comes out of those magazines. Go Google somebody like Andries Oliphant, who I would recommend that people go Google these people. I mean, you've seen this on the cover of this magazine. Ahmad Dangor, I think he passed away last year or earlier this year. And others I can mention is Work in Progress that I just mentioned. Then the alternative press that came out in the late 1980s, Vrye Weekblad, which was an Afrikaans kind of newspaper / magazine. And then more than that, I think like outside South Africa, there's a person whose work we try to bring a lot more attention to it, like the Nigerian intellectual, Edwin Madanagu, who writes columns in Nigerian newspapers, but people don't see it outside Nigeria. And we're trying to find a way to bring those kind of people back, bring those ideas back and bring it into the mainstream, and using Africa as a country to try and do it. So it's not a case. No slight to Gwen and Gwenya. Please keep reading Jacobin, and please keep using the post office. Please keep using the public utilities. Maybe she'll get some good ideas from reading it, given that we're not getting any good ideas at the moment from the ANC, these are the two dominant political parties in the case of South Africa. But yeah, for us, it's not. I think we just try to make the point that it's not true that there isn't an intelligent left in South Africa. Just because right now it is between, I suppose, what's his name, Julius Malema and Ace Magosule and the 10 babies of the now 13 babies of Peter Mfwedi, doesn't mean there isn't an intelligent left in Africa or in any other African country.